17 years after the terrorist attacks in America, a recent report claims that U.S. money is finding its way to al-Qaeda with the implicit support of the U.S. What on earth is going on? And as leaders from China, Russia, Japan and South Korea meet in Vladivostok, my exclusive interview with China's ambassador to Russia, Li Hui. Welcome to The Point. From Beijing, I'm Li Xin. Today is the 11th of September, a day that has gone down in history as the infamous 9/11, when al-Qaeda operatives struck the Twin Towers and other targets in New York and Washington, D.C. Now, a recent investigation by the AP has found that militias in Yemen, backed by the U.S. and UK-backed Saudi-led coalition, have been recruiting hundreds of al-Qaeda militants to fight Houthi forces to reinstate the ousted government of Yemeni President Hadi. The coalition has apparently been cutting secret deals with these al-Qaeda fighters, paying some to leave key towns with their weapons and looted cash. Other reports have pointed out that 17 years after the 9/11, al-Qaeda may be actually stronger than ever, and U.S. policies in the Middle East appear to have encouraged its spread. Is the U.S. complicit in deals struck between its allies and its arch enemy? How have their policies emboldened this group rather than vanquishing it? Joining me for the discussion are Ivan Eland, a senior fellow of the Independent Institute, and Joel Rubin, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Mr. Eland, let me go to you first. Now, Michael Horton, a fellow at the Jamestown Foundation, a U.S. analysis group that tracks terrorism, claims that elements of the U.S. military are clearly aware that much of what the U.S. is doing in Yemen is aiding al-Qaeda. However, he says supporting the United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia against what the U.S. views as Iranian expansionism takes priority over battling al-Qaeda and even stabilizing Yemen. Do you believe that to be fair comments?
Well, it's probably a fair comment. I think anything you do to go against the Houthis in Yemen, it certainly helps al-Qaeda because they, the two sides don't get along. So I think implicitly you're going to help al-Qaeda if you're helping the Saudis in the UAE, whether you really want to or not. And so I think it's the whole thing is ridiculous. I don't think the U.S. really has any strategic interests in Yemen. The Saudis can worry about that, but I just don't think the United States should dirty its hands. A lot of civilians are being killed in Yemen by the bombing, and I really think that the United States should stand down from helping Saudi Arabia and UAE battle the Houthis there, because it's just not worth it. And also, I think the indirect benefit is to benefit al-Qaeda, and I think al-Qaeda is a more serious threat than Iranian expansionism is.
Well, one of the principal goals of al-Qaeda is to drive the U.S. armed forces out of Saudi Arabia by violence. They have issued fatwas or rulings, according to interpretations of Islamic law, indicating that such attacks were both proper and necessary. So, Mr. Rubin, isn't it ironic that Saudi coalition forces are now dealing with al-Qaeda fighters?
Well, on the anniversary of 9/11, as you mentioned today, and thank you for mentioning that, it's ironic that we are taking our eye off the ball, quite frankly, related to al-Qaeda once again. And the United States is getting pulled into regional fights. The fight in Yemen is a fight between the Saudis and the Iranians, one where we are now actively participating, and there's a lot of concern in the American Congress about that legislation trying to pull back American military involvement in this fight. And so, yes, as we get further sucked into it, there's no doubt that we are going to get pulled into supporting potential fighters that we really don't want to be associated with. And so certainly this fight in Yemen, the longer it drags on, the worse it gets. the Yemeni people, nearly 8 million, are on the brink of starvation. It's the worst humanitarian crisis currently in the world, according to the United Nations. So we really need to get our heads straight about who we're trying to help and who we're trying to hurt. And right now, we don't have that straight at all.
Actually, as we speak, a ceremony is going on at the site of the attacks, right, 17 years ago. And as we mentioned, the al-Qaeda on the Arabic Peninsula, or AQAP, otherwise they are known, they have positioned themselves as a virtual ally to the Saudi coalition partners, which include the United States. So at this moment, what do the American general public think about this? Are they aware of this? What is the discussion, Mr. Eland?
Well, I think as has been mentioned, there's a bipartisan group in Congress that really doesn't like us helping this coalition bomb Yemen, because it's creating a humanitarian crisis, and it's also civilians are being killed either through the bombing or because they can't get relief supplies, and a lot of people are starving and are malnourished, and so it's a real crisis. And I think it not only besmirches the U.S. Reputation, but as we were saying before, it indirectly helps al-Qaeda. And I think, you know, we've been reckless in the past in helping people that turned out to be flip-flopped and be our enemies. Remember, al-Qaeda was born out of the Afghanistan Mujahideen that the United States was supporting versus the Soviet Union, which seemed like a great idea at the time, but which really gave us the first threat to our homeland since the War of 1812. And so and in Syria, we also supported elements to try to overthrow Assad in Syria that were probably funneling indirectly weapons to groups that either supported al-Qaeda or ISIS. And so oftentimes we are too overactive, I think, in supporting these groups, and we don't ask ourselves, do we really have a strategic interest in doing so? And I think that's the case in Yemen, because we really don't have a strategic interest there in helping Saudi Arabia or the UAE there.
Mm-hmm. According to a LA Times report, the al-Qaeda group has amassed the largest fighting force in its existence, 20,000 militants in Syria and Yemen alone, and it spreads in North Africa, the Levant, and remains strong in Pakistan-Afghanistan border. So what are the explanations behind the growing impact of this network, Mr. Rubin?
Well, the longer that we have ungoverned spaces and that we have conflicts where, in the case of Syria, as you mentioned, and certainly in Iraq with the Islamic State, and in significant parts of North Africa, when there are ungoverned spaces, it allows for armed militant groups to flourish, and extremist groups, al-Qaeda, as you're describing, and a variety of other terrorist organizations as well. They are right now free in many ways to organize in manners that they hadn't been before. So the American objective in engaging with countries in the region should really be to not just go after these groups militarily, but also try to dry out the causes of it and work in partnership with these governments to bring more stability to these countries. And that hasn't been working very well for the Trump administration. They have really focused instead on the hard power aspect of engaging in this issue, and have reduced American diplomatic presence. American foreign aid has been cut. There's a lot of isolation now of the United States diplomatically, and so we're sort of in this negative cycle of feeding into a dynamic that encourages instability rather than stability, and that does help such groups to flourish.
Mr. Eland, does the U.S. at this moment have the choice on whether to adjust its policy or not? Is it the case of they are damned if they do and they're damned if they don't?
Well, I mean, I don't think so, because I think we can adjust our policy, and I don't think the problem with governing ungoverned spaces is that the United States is not really the government responsible for that, and I think a lot of times groups, including al-Qaeda, the original reason that bin Laden got mad at the United States was because he thought we were meddling in Saudi Arabia and we had troops there. So we were trying to ensure stability there and protect Saudi oil from other countries such as Iraq, etc. But oftentimes when we get involved there, these groups turn on us, and there's been instability. There's been Islamist extremism for centuries, and if we stay out of all that, they're much less likely to attack us, either overseas or such as our businesses or our diplomats, or here at home in the United States. So I think this idea that we're going to stabilize all these places, the Middle East has never been stable, and there's too many conflicts there. And I think we just need to in most of these, we need to let the people work the conflicts out themselves. The United States has $21 trillion worth of debt, and I think we are overextended, and we have to choose our fights. And I think we ought to send troops only when people are attacking us.
Mr. Rubin, do you agree? And also, does the current President Donald Trump understand the situation and poised to do something, to bring things back to the right track if they can?
Well, I don't fully agree. I don't think it's an all-or-nothing dynamic where if we just didn't engage in the Middle East somehow, we would be seen as a friend and ally of these extremist groups. Many of these groups terrorize their own populations. We have to remember in Iraq, the Islamic State, they were killing Iraqis, and they were creating significant havoc and chaos for religious minority groups and ethnic cleansing within their areas as well. So, and it's not as if these are groups that are somehow going to do nice if the U.S. stays out. That said, we need to pick our spots effectively. We need to work with governments who are willing to engage their populations in a process that brings in inclusivity, political inclusivity, and development. And that has been very difficult for the Trump administration to conceptualize and to execute. And we even see it now, a potential dangerous spot with the Palestinians, where the Trump administration has cut aid to the Palestinians, and these are areas where then who are they going to turn to? Well, they may turn to more extreme elements because of a disconnect from a government and from civil society and from support from the outside. So it's not a cookie-cutter approach, but I don't think that this administration right now is attempting to engage in a way that pulls the societies in a direction that tamps down on extremism.
What has been observed, however, is the intensified drone strikes by the U.S. administration under President Trump on the militants, and these strikes are killing so many civilians. Whether or not they're killing more civilians than their targeted militants is really an unknown answer. So, Mr. Eland, do you think in terms of these drone strikes, they ought to be continued, or something has to be done there?
No, I think first of all, they've never been approved by Congress. They've stretched the 2001 authorization, so they're under our system. They're unconstitutional and illegal. But we've seen Bush, Obama, and now Trump do this in an unconstitutional and an illegal manner, and they're also very counterproductive. They do kill civilians, and nobody expects these groups, these Islamic extremists, to be nice and friendly to the United States, but they just won't attack us. In fact, ISIS always focused on the near enemies in the Middle East rather than the far enemy. Al-Qaeda focused on the far enemy because they wanted us out of the Middle East. So I think certainly we can go after Al-Qaeda if they're trying to attack us, but I don't think that we need to go after each branch of Al-Qaeda around the world. Because most of even Al-Qaeda has local interests, and if we don't really need to be there, we need to let the situation play out. And if you want to, you can provide intelligence to some of these governments to locate militants and that sort of thing. That's fine. But I think sending U.S. troops or U.S. advisors merely inflames the thing. We see that in the Taliban. The Taliban had a resurgence because we turned what was the post 9/11 attack to take out the Taliban into a nation-building mission, which was regarded as an occupation. And the Taliban has resurged because they don't like foreign occupiers in Afghanistan. And we should have known that when the British failed 3 times and the Soviets failed fairly recently in Afghanistan. So Afghanistan is an example, and I think many countries in the Middle East don't like non-Muslims on Muslim soil. That seems to be a triggering event for them. And these drone attacks are just because they're from the air. That doesn't mean they're not revving up the population and al-Qaeda against the United States.
Okay, we've got to go. Mr. Ivan Eland, a senior fellow of the Independent Institute, and Joel Rubin, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. And you have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break, and when we come back on the day that Presidents Xi and Putin meet in Vladivostok, here's my exclusive interview with the Chinese ambassador to Russia about the close ties between the two countries. Stay with me. Chinese President Xi Jinping has met with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin for talks in Vladivostok on the sidelines of the Eastern Economic Forum in Far East region of Russia. Now, both leaders agree their bilateral relationship was entering a new era and agreed to resolutely develop their partnership and look to maintain world peace and stability. The two leaders also witnessed the signing of multitude agreements before holding a joint press conference. The trade numbers reflect the deepening ties between the two sides. Figures from the Chinese Ministry of Commerce show that bilateral trade have reached $84 billion in 2017. That's an increase of over 1/5 year on year. The number is expected to reach around $100 billion by the end of the year. The two countries have traditionally cooperated in the fields of energy, aerospace, aviation and infrastructure. The two have also actively collaborated in emerging areas such as the Far East development, the digital economy and cross-border e-commerce. Now, Presidents Xi and Putin will push ahead with plans to expand cooperation at the local level. So earlier this year, during my trip to Moscow, I spoke to Li Hui, China's ambassador to Russia. Besides frequent interactions between top leaders, what is the basis for the two countries to develop their relationship?
For our two countries to develop a comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination, as a Chinese saying puts it, we enjoy the advantage of good timing, geographical convenience and wide support of the people. We are, first of all, two big neighbouring countries sharing a border of more than 4,300 kilometres. The two peoples have had friendly exchanges for a long time, and the friendship between our two countries is deeply rooted. Meanwhile, our two countries are now working hard to build our respective countries and strive to make them into stronger powers. We both need a favourable external environment. Apart from that, as two major powers with great influence in the world and permanent members of the UN Security Council, China and Russia undertake their mission and responsibility of safeguarding regional and global peace, upholding fairness and justice for mankind. Therefore, the two countries have maintained close strategic coordination at the international level. It can be said we share identical or similar positions on many major international issues. We are facing our respective development opportunities as well as common challenges. Therefore, our common undertakings and goals require us to steadily strengthen our strategic coordination.
What kind of potential can be tapped into to boost economic and trade ties between the two sides?
In 2017, the trade volume between China and Russia reached $84 billion, an increase of 20%. I think this is somewhat remarkable. Against the backdrop of a global economic downturn, China-Russia trade has maintained an upturn. I think this is the result of joint efforts by both sides and the close attention and steady push by the two heads of state and the two governments. While this result is pleasing, there is still great potential for the economic and trade growth of the two countries. In fact, our two heads of state have laid down ambitious blueprints and long-term goals, as well as specific plans for the economic and trade development of the two countries. We both need to work hard to tap these potentials and fulfill the goals set by the two heads of state. What is this goal? For example, the two heads of state have set the goal of raising our trade volume to $200 billion by 2020, so we still have a lot to do. I'm full of confidence. Just now you asked what we need to do next to constantly push the development of bilateral trade. I think the first thing to do is to continuously improve the trade structure. We have done a lot in this regard and achieved remarkable results. Meanwhile, we must further enhance the role of SMEs and strengthen the exchanges and cooperation between SMEs of the two countries. Great potentials remain to be tapped in this regard. Our two countries are paying increasingly greater attention to the role of SMEs in economic development. We should also give SMEs a greater role to play in economic and trade cooperation between the two countries. On the other hand, we can adopt further measures to help dovetail the Belt and Road Initiative and Eurasian Economic Union and achieve connectivity. This involves, in the first place, the development of Russia's Far East region. China and Russia can cooperate more closely to push forward the opening up and development of the Far East region. I think all these aspects have great potentials. In the future, both countries should continue to take active and practical steps along the direction set by the two heads of state and elevate their economic and trade cooperation to a new high.
So the year 2018 and the year 2019 will be years of local cooperation and exchanges between China and Russia. So how do you look at the prospects in those aspects, and whether China is going to expand its commercial activity and capital input in the different regions of Russia?
I think it is very important for the leadership and the governments of the two countries to designate this year and next year as the years of China-Russia local cooperation and exchanges. Cooperation between local authorities of the two countries is an important part of the continuous and in-depth development of the China-Russia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership of Coordination. Cooperation between local authorities actually has played an important part in the steady development of Sino-Russian relations in recent years. In other words, local cooperation has achieved remarkable results and played a major role. According to our statistics, all of China's 31 provinces, autonomous regions and municipalities, except the Tibet Autonomous Region, have established ties of economic, trade cooperation and people-to-people exchanges. The majority of 85 federal regions in Russia have also formed close ties of cooperation and exchanges with local Chinese authorities. In the local cooperation between the two countries, two mechanisms play a major role. One is the cooperation and exchange mechanisms between northeast China and the Russian Far East region and eastern Siberia, and the other is the exchange and cooperation mechanism between the upper and middle reaches of the Yangtze River and the Volga Federal District. The two mechanisms are led by officials at the vice premier level of the two countries. These mechanisms have played an important role in recent years and have effectively promoted bilateral economic trade cooperation and people-to-people exchanges and yielded fruitful results. We believe that, propelled by the leadership and governments of the two countries, local cooperation will surely achieve even more fruitful results.
So China and Russia have become a most friendly country in the minds of people of both countries. What kind of role do you think national level activities jointly organized by these two countries have played in that process? For instance, Year of the Nation, Year of Language, media exchanges or youth exchanges activities?
Holding the Year of Russia in China and the Year of China in Russia is a strategic decision made by the two heads of state and is of great significance. I think these events have achieved marked effects. First of all, it has brought the two peoples emotionally closer to each other and enhanced their mutual understanding and trust. For example, the Russia-China Youth-Friendly Exchange Year further boosted the exchanges between the young people of the two countries and enabled them to gain a better understanding of the other country. Another example is Tourism Year of China in Russia and the Tourism Year of Russia in China. They serve to strengthen exchanges between the two peoples through tourism. In 2017, 1.5 million Chinese tourists visited Russia, and the number of Russian tourists visiting China is probably even higher. This year, as Russia will host a number of major events, including the Soccer World Cup, the number of Chinese tourists to visit Russia is expected to reach 2 million. China has become the largest source country of tourists for Russia. The increasing exchanges and contacts between the two peoples have indeed further deepened the traditional friendship between the two countries. According to a survey conducted by a Russian polling institution, in response to the question which country is the most friendly to Russia, China was regarded as the most friendly country by most respondents. I think all these are closely related to the events such as the Year of China and the Year of Russia in recent years.
So finally, I would like to ask you to react to some analysis that we've seen in the international media, for instance, saying that the relationship between China and Russia is a marriage of interest, only for short-term interest, for the time being, for convenience, and that when China and Russia coming closer, maybe it's going to pose greater threat and cause greater confrontation in the international arena. What is your reaction to these comments?
China and Russia have developed a comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination, and the two peoples have maintained friendly ties. I think this is a strategic choice made by our two countries. This is our long-term strategic goal, rather than an expedient measure. Our two countries are neighbors, and the two neighboring major countries have to maintain friendship so that they can focus on our national development without extraneous worries to distract them, so that they can promote their national economies and bring greater benefits to their peoples. Therefore, the leadership of China and Russia, as well as the two peoples, have broad consensus and consistent views in this regard. We used to have close, friendly exchanges in the past, which have brought great practical benefits to our country. Our friendly relations do not pose any threat to any third party, nor do they target any third parties. Our friendship is precisely for the purpose of safeguarding world peace and upholding fairness and justice in the world, for the faster development of our respective countries and the better lives of our two peoples. Our two countries do not pose any threat to any countries. Some countries and some media have long harbored some misunderstandings or ulterior motives towards us. They are always uneasy about our two countries forming a comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination, and our two peoples maintaining traditional friendship. I think this is entirely unjustified. The fact that our two countries have developed a comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination and our two peoples have maintained traditional friendship can be nothing but an indispensable and important part conducive to the endeavor of maintaining world peace and stability.
My interview with China's ambassador to Russia, Li Hui. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Lu Xin. As always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.